Good afternoon. I'm You-tien Hsing from Geography Department here at Cal. I want to thank you for coming to this special Center for Chinese Studies forum on the 2008 Beijing Olympics. The focus of this forum today is about the relationship between mega events, especially international sport events like your Olympic Games in the cities. So we are really looking at how mega events, sporting events in cities that host such mega events. So we will look at the political, socioeconomic, physical, and ideological impact of such events in the context of urban entrepreneurialism and urban image construction embodied in such events, and the social contestation provoked by such events. And that's how we will frame this forum today when we look at Beijing's 2008 Olympics. We are very honored today to have Professor Anne-Marie Broudehoux to join us from Montreal to give us the lead speech in this forum. Professor Broudehoux is a professor of School of Design at the University of Quebec in Montreal. She actually is no stranger to us. She got her PhD from Architecture Department in 2002, and an expert in the field of cultural critiques of cities, particularly Chinese cities. And she's the author of The Making and Selling of Post-Mao Beijing, published in 2004, which also wins her the book prize of International Planning History Society in 2006. So she's really what most appropriate, probably the only person that we know of who has dealt with this subject in such depth and breadth as well. And following her talk, I will use about 30 minutes to talk about my own research on the social impact of urban redevelopment projects that have been going on in most, if not all, Chinese large and small and medium-sized cities in the past 20 years in Beijing because of the Olympic Games, or in the name of the Olympic Games. Such major urban construction projects have been built in much faster pace and in much larger scale than that is in many other cities. But such massive construction is made possible only by massive destruction. So I will use my 30 minutes talking about this destruction and the social protest provoked by such massive destruction in Beijing. And in order to put this Beijing Olympic Games in perspective, we also have a third panelist today, urban geographer from the campus as well, to talk about the Korean experience, the Olympics in Seoul in 1988, and also she will compare the Olympics in Seoul in 1988 with another international sport event, a mega event in Seoul. That is the 2002 World Cup game between Japan and Korea, to give us a broader perspective on how nationalism and these international sport events are connected or disconnected. So that will be our program today. Without further ado, let us welcome Professor Broudehoux to kickstart this forum for us. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me and my first appearance back at Berkeley after having grown into being a professor. You want to get the lights? Thank you. So, as you are now very aware, the Beijing Olympic Games have been the occasion to accelerate the modernization of China's national capital and to transform the global perception of the city and its inhabitants. This paper examines some of the mechanisms behind this process of urban image construction, by looking into two main aspects of this transformation, one focusing on the city's physical landscape, the other one concerned with its social image. It also assesses some of the impacts of these two processes and investigates what kinds of response they have elicited, including diverse forms of resistance by different categories of actors within local society. So let me first begin by placing this phenomenon into context. Over the last few decades, the restructuring of the global economy and the post-Fordist urban condition have pushed cities around the world to adopt a more entrepreneurial approach to city governance so as to efficiently compete on the global market, increasingly aware of the importance of their world image for attracting capital, tourists, and qualified labor. Post-industrial cities have invested massively in image construction programs. These programs rely upon the manipulation of the urban landscape, harnessed as a cultural resource that can be capitalized upon to position the city as a financial consumption or entertainment center. Among the dominant tactics used globally to increase urban visibility and create a positive urban identity is the hosting of mega events or short-term events of global importance, which include international exhibitions, world conferences, and sporting events such as the Olympics and the World Cup. Hosting high-profile events not only helps achieve international prominence and national prestige by promoting an image of the city as a vital and dynamic place in the international media, but it also represents a unique catalyst for infrastructure investment and environmental improvements. As such, mega events act as a developmental engine, helping legitimize large-scale transformations and giving local governments the license to reprioritize the urban agenda without the public scrutiny they usually receive. They enable existing plans to be fast-tracked through the planning and development stages while making it easier to rally investors to finance these projects. While such image construction efforts may carry some short-term benefits by momentarily boosting civic pride and stimulating the local economy in the tourism and real estate sectors, they also carry long-term social, cultural, and economic costs, especially in developing countries. The growing reliance upon private capital in shaping the new urban landscape has allowed the interest of local and global economic elites to dominate the planning agenda. Event-led urban regeneration often concentrates investments in certain sectors of the city while depriving others of capital, thus exacerbating pre-existing spatial inequalities. The massive displacement of the poor in slum clearance interventions that open up land for more profitable use also affects social spatial distribution and can further impoverish an already deprived population. Hosting mega events also puts great pressure on cities to transform their human environments through social reform and disciplining programs that seek to produce a tame and obedient citizenry to fit global expectation of civility. Finally, the construction of an image of development and modernity and the desire to show the city in the best possible light often leads to the active concealment of landscapes of poverty and the elimination of visible traces of those who do not fit this representation. Mega event image construction can thus have important impacts on the lives of economically and socially marginalized populations and may bring about a tightening of the social control apparatus, the imposition of limits on civil liberties, and thus raises questions of representation, equity, and citizenship. The Beijing Olympic Games constitutes a rich laboratory to study both the mechanisms and impacts of urban image construction. Of course, the Beijing Olympics has not only served as a booster strategy for the city of Beijing, but they also represent a major event for nation building, an occasion to showcase China's rightful rise as a world power and to rally an increasingly divided people among a common cause. After winning the Olympic bid, Beijing city leaders immediately embarked in a massive urban image construction program, whose scale testifies to the paramount importance of the Games for China. The Beijing Olympics were planned as a total spectacle, where every aspect will be tightly controlled and imagineered, with nothing left to chance. I think you've heard about the seeding of the clouds to make sure it will not rain during the Olympics. China had promised the best Olympics ever. As the ambitious plan was carried out, it soon became clear that the 2008 Games will be the most lavish ever staged, with investments of over $40 billion. This is a symbolic number. Nobody really knows how much it's going to cost, but this is an estimate, which is already 3 times what Athens spent and more than all Summer Games since 1984 combined. One of the most visible and noted actions in this program has been the construction of a series of iconic architectural projects to update Beijing's world image. Beijing thus followed other aspiring world cities in exploiting the emblematic power of architecture, capitalizing upon spectacular design, historic heritage, and alluring urban iconography as key generators of symbolic capital, helping market and advertise their cities. Long used as a mark of distinction, allowing cities to capture the semiotic advantage over rival destination, monumental architecture now plays a major role in the new political economy of science, as a tradable symbol of value and an essential tool of city marketing. Cities around the world have thus embarked in a competition for global preeminence by building the most daring and technologically advanced buildings, displaying self-conscious innovation and bearing the signature of global design celebrities. The spectacular architecture is now valued not only for its advertising power and ability to brand the skyline, it's also increasingly seen as a motor of economic development. But whereas most cities will invest in a handful of spectacular projects, Beijing will soon boast more than a dozen, turning the city into a museum of the architectural avant-garde. This building spree recalls earlier bursts of intensive construction that periodically transformed Beijing's landscape throughout the 20th century in response to major shifts in ideology, and which all represented a unitary vision of local identity. For example, in the 1950s, Mao commissioned a series of Soviet-inspired monuments to mark the rise of a new socialist nation. In the 1990s, Mayor Chen Xitong tried to reassert Beijing's distinctive character, Chinese character, by imposing a neo-traditional design code on garish postmodern buildings, which were derided for wearing Western suits with Chinese hats. Truly unprecedented in scale, this new round of conspicuous construction initiated by President Jiang Zemin in sight of the Olympics underscores China's emergence as an authoritarian nation fully committed to capitalism. Built in partnership with the private sector, this new architectural landscape also testifies to China's particular configuration of market society, where economic and political power are increasingly conflated. By inviting the world's leading architects to build spectacular Olympic venues, Beijing hoped to both leave a mark in Olympic history and transform its outdated world image. Relying upon daring forms, cutting-edge designs, and a spectacular price tag, these architectural icons have sought to create a strong and lasting visual representation and mark the global collective imagination with something bold, heroic, and unmistakably modern. By making no concessions to the past or to socialist ideology, this new architecture challenges China's old image as poor, third world, self-centered, and retrograde, and affirms the leadership's commitment to modernity. To modernity. It also reflects upon the government's dynamism, authority, and willpower, and glamorizes the party's image by transforming a repressive socialist gerontocracy into a forward-looking, benevolent modern state. While Beijing's new iconography embodies the continuous and powerful presence of the state in the urban landscape, it also testifies to the reconfiguration of the state and to a shift in the balance of power in favor of a capitalist class. By projecting the constructed reality of an economically successful and well-functioning society, this architectural spectacle helps legitimate the powerful interests of political and economic elites, And like elsewhere, the seductive urbanism helps naturalize and conceal the rising contradictions and social inequalities that characterize the post-Fordist city. In Beijing, urban beautification projects have also focused on neighborhood branding, another common practice of entrepreneurial urban governance. This approach, which was earlier used in the 90s, as we see here, seeks to revitalize key urban neighborhoods and historic districts with a unique and marketable visual identity, and to turn them into consumption and entertainment destinations. It capitalizes upon an area's cultural capital to recreate an idealized vision packaged to appeal to consumers and tourists. Branded neighborhoods usually display a unified look. You know other neighborhoods like this in Shanghai, for example, and they're all over the world, of course. So usually display a unified look with a homogeneous urban design, architecture, and signage, even at times having their own trademark logos. They are usually managed by an association of private owners who hires street cleaners and private security agents to keep the area safe, clean, and orderly. Like open-air shopping malls, these privatized and commodified urban districts act as pockets of global capital in the local landscape, as their retail environments is dominated by a handful of predictable, globally established brand outlets. In the years leading to the Olympics, a series of Beijing neighborhoods have undergone a branding process akin to the transformation of Wanfujing, which we saw in the late 1990s. For example, outside the western edge of the old city at Sanlitun, a popular cosmopolitan entertainment district has been the object of a spectacular reconstruction as foreign designers and architects reinvented this once eclectic bar street into a sophisticated leisure and consumption center. But it's the historic district of Bachelar near Tianmen that has undergone the most spectacular and controversial transformation. This popular historic neighborhood, which had been one of the city's most vibrant shopping and entertainment district, has been partly demolished to allow the construction of an upscale shopping district with a Qing dynasty architectural flavor. While shamelessly capitalizing upon the neighborhood's history, the construction of this historic simulacrum was premised upon the destruction of a dynamic cultural landscape and with a vibrant community life. Billboards erected to hide the demolished area project the constructed reality of an idealized neighborhood where consumption has become the sole focus of public life. At the more urban scale, a third approach to urban image construction has focused on scenographic urbanism. By freeing up important monuments previously encroached by slums and setting them up as iconic objects in the landscape. Another aspect of this urban landscaping approach has focused on the opening up of monumental boulevards and roadways, including the expansion of the city's symbolic central north-south axis, which now runs 5 miles from a new railway station in the south through the new Tianmen district all the way to the Olympic Green in the north. Incidentally, and this is what the press has talked about a lot, is that this axis was designed in collaboration with Albert Speer Jr., Speer, who was the son and namesake of Hitler's favorite architect, famous for his axis design in Berlin, which thus attracted a lot of international media attention. And apart from all these projects, the city has also budgeted $7 billion to build important infrastructure, city parks, plant millions of trees, and improve urban streets. But behind the glamorous image of these different projects lie the countless stories of evictions, expropriation, and battles for fair compensation. We'll go in more details in the next presentation. But the Geneva-based Center on Housing Rights and Eviction estimates that over 1 million citizens have been uprooted and saw their homes demolished to make way for the Olympic facilities and infrastructure projects in Beijing. Once again, these numbers are difficult to demonstrate. The dispersal of the underprivileged in the far suburbs not only causes important social dislocation and loss of community ties, but it also diminishes people's organizational power to fight for fair access to urban resources. If the state's land ownership and power of eviction allowed for the rapid and relatively low-cost transformation of the city, you have to remember that all these very expensive projects we've looked at would cost between 10 and 14 times more to build in Europe or America. Beijing's image construction efforts also relied upon the exploitation of a vast, pliant, and disposable migrant labor force, whose ply is well documented. While Beijing's new prosperity depends largely upon their labor, migrants have been among its main casualties. Denied full citizenship rights in the city, they have no claims to subsidize housing or education for their children, and have been pushed to become permanent nomads in the city, constantly on the move as they change jobs or face evictions. So how has this image construction program been received by Beijingers? The vast majority proudly approves of Olympic transformations, and overt expressions of discontent are rare, especially given the political climate in the years leading to the Olympics. Still, some prominent members of society have kept a vigilant eye upon urban redevelopment to keep Olympic projects in check, especially Olympic spending. Throughout the construction process, intellectuals, preservation activists, and other public figures have voiced their concerns, signing petitions to the central government to protest project design, criticize the selection of foreign designers. This was a big debate, the fact that almost only foreign architects were selected for all these venues, to also demand budget revisions or condemn corruption and exploitation. Sometimes in 2004, there was a major stop in all construction, venue construction, and there was a major budget reappraisal. A lot of the venues were scaled down, but none of the projects were effectively blocked. But they did bring major design modification, more transparent management, and improved working conditions. But most resistance has been individual and unorganized, as in the case of those stubborn nails, those recalcitrant households who resist eviction and refuse to vacate their houses without the promise of a fair compensation. The work of conceptual artist Zhang Dali, who's now well known for those giant enigmatic figures, graffiti figures that condemned the destruction of the old city since the mid-1990s, also continue to haunt Beijing's Olympic redevelopment and to silently denounce the social and cultural tragedies it provokes. So this is very interesting. It's in the Tiananmen area that was demolished, and it's only a fraction of an old Ping Fang house that is still standing and occupied by a mother and her daughter. And I traced Zhang Dali's logo of resistance on the wall of this house. Another artist, or rather a group of artists, photographers, cinematographers around the artist owning and his Dashilar project, also represent an uncommon expression of organized opposition to urban beautification in their attempt to save this historic neighborhood set to be demolished as part of the Tiananmen redevelopment project. So setting up a website documenting the area's rich history and touring the world with a film chronicling the battle to save the neighborhood, as experienced through the eyes of one of its victims. So this group has played a major role in keeping Beijing's redevelopment in the spotlight, both locally and internationally. But if open forms of contestation remain exceptional, other less visible strategies for voicing dissatisfaction have developed. Among the most common are popular practices of linguistic resistance and verbal expressions of symbolic discontent. For centuries, Beijingers have used similar narrative strategies to remodel official slogans and transform dominant discourse into absurdist and derogatory flips of the tongue. In Olympic Beijing, the principal means of signaling dissatisfaction with urban redevelopment has thus been through the uttered word and the use of colorful nicknames. Olympic mega projects have been the main target of these verbal attacks. For example, popular reception to Rem Koolhaas's revolutionary design for the CCTV headquarters has been harsh, as suggested by its prosaic, even demeaning likening to a bench, a kneeling man, a pair of pants, or more often, a donut. The building's common reference as Weifang, or the dangerous or crooked building, expresses general suspicion about its structural integrity and questions the soundness of the state's stylistic choice. The National Theatre also suffered the scorn of the public ever since the design competition stage. The crude, at times vulgar, popular renaming endured by this project leaves no doubt about its approval rate, ranging from light mockery, such as the big bubble or the pillbox, to more insulting variations on the egg concept, to less equivocal evocations of a tomb, a funeral mount, or a shiny piece of donkey droppings. These sarcastic renaming practices are far from innocent, but conceal a deeper political criticism. More than a simple reference to its rounded shape, descriptions of the National Theatre as a tomb reveals a biting criticism of Jiang Zemin, who sponsored this project to immortalize his reign. Located at a stone's throw from Tiananmen Square, its important setback from Chang'an Avenue allows a perfect alignment with Mao's mausoleum in the center of the square. I think you can see the blue at the water and the mausoleum, well, not perfectly alignment, but there's a strong similarity in plan. The theater thus appears to have been intentionally conceived as a memorial to its sponsor and a way to ensure his elevation into China's pantheon of venerable political leaders. In my research, informants the most likely to have resorted to these weapons of the weak were close neighbors of Olympic projects who either lost a portion of their neighborhood, suffered the partial demolition of their home, endured displacement, or awaited a fair resettlement. The simple presence of these buildings in the landscape is a constant reminder of their limited control over their destiny and of their own exclusion from the benefits enjoyed by some members of the new China. Although their impact is limited, by allowing people to voice their frustration and criticize by proxy the regime who condones such radical transformation, these verbal practices potentially bring them one step closer to organized opposition. Partaking in these symbolic acts help people feel part of an imagined community of resistance, of a collectivity of interests, which may empower them to take things one step further and lay the groundwork for more concrete actions. Olympic image construction efforts in Beijing have not been limited to physical beautification, but also included a series of social reform programs which seek to show the world that China has not only developed economically, but socially and culturally as well. The Olympics were thus harnessed as a powerful tool of social engineering to transform both the body and the mind of the population and to turn Beijing residents into well-disciplined representatives of 21st century China. The Games were perceived by Olympic organizers and civic leaders as an opportunity for societal advancement, a stage for popular acculturation into global cosmopolitan society, and an occasion to promote state-sanctioned ideals of Chineseness. Part of Beijing's Olympic image construction program has thus involved a multi-million-dollar campaign for improving the demeanor, quality, and civilization level of the city's 15 million inhabitants. The way people speak, dress, their manners and personal hygiene, the way they move, wait, cheer at events, and behave in public are all considered important issues for the success of the Games. Focusing on hygiene, civility, morality, sport ethics, and respect for law and order, public interest messages in the press, on television, and on public billboards across the city instruct citizens on the proper use of public toilets, urge them to speak proper Mandarin or learn English, and to smile more. Specifically targeted behaviors for reform include spitting, queue jumping, jaywalking, hawking, swearing, and smoking. In China, the moral education of the people has long been viewed as a function of good government. Throughout the 20th century, Chinese elites and intellectuals and officials have advocated civilization, or wenming, as a national strategy for radical social transformation. In the Mao years, civilizing discourses were mainly anti-feudal in nature and sought to promote modernization, socialism, and revolutionary ideals. Under the principles of social egalitarianism, it was considered revolutionary to flout conventions, especially Confucian norms of civility, and to endorse simple manners. Caring too much about face, etiquette, and appearances were condemned as elitist and bourgeois. In the post-Mao period, the civilization model was reoriented to serve the new ideals of market socialism. The new discourse focused on the building of a socialist spiritual civilization and sought to instill a proper commitment to both market and the state, while reviving national identity. By exposing the failure of the Chinese people to embody international standards of modernity, civility, and discipline, this discourse justified the need for a national pedagogical campaign to refashion the Chinese people into the disciplined, productive citizens necessary for China to assume its rightful place in a global community of civilized nations. More recently, Hu Jintao's administration formally endorsed a new doctrine, that of the harmonious society, which signaled a shift in the party's focus from promoting economic growth to solving worsening social tensions and imbalance. The harmonious society doctrine also focuses on notions of public order, rule of law, national stability, social justice, and equality. Exhortations to civility, which has long been known as a social lubricant meant to harmonize social relations and facilitate peaceful coexistence, thus appears as a timely response to the growing disparities and mounting popular discontent, which are threatening national stability. The Olympic Games thus represent both a means and an end in implementing the harmonious society ideal, and have played a key role in the official orchestration of the civilizing discourse. In fact, Olympic ideals are often fused with nationalist notions of a harmonious society and remnants of the old spiritual civilization discourse in order to support state efforts to transform social behavior. These three discourses were merged into a new overarching rhetoric, which I call the Olympic civilization discourse. The Olympic Games thus became a key umbrella concept, a kind of magic signifier that would serve as a powerful tool of reform and promote different aspects of state ideology. The framing of Olympic propaganda in concordance with the harmonious society discourse helped concretize the role of the Games as an exercise in national image construction by projecting a state-sanctioned vision of China as a friendly, modern, disciplined, and united society. The discourse emanating from Olympic promotional material is thus embedded in wider discourses on citizenship and national identity, which resonate with the Olympic ideals of brotherhood among people, equality, peace, mutual respect, and fair play. Olympic propaganda is thus greatly infused with nationalist rhetoric, to the point that the nation and the Games have become indissociable in the collective imagination, and that serving one is like serving the other. Embracing the Olympic Games is not only a civic duty, but a patriotic gesture and a contribution to the advancement of the motherland. By extension, non-compliance to social reforms become both anti-patriotic, it becomes anti-patriotic. Citizens are thus exhorted to help China rise to greatness by changing their behavior and improving their manners with complete devotion. One of the tactics used to ensure the success of the Olympic civilization campaign has been to appeal directly to the individual rather than focusing on the collective. Slogans have used the first person to make people feel personally responsible for the success of the Olympics. In order to further this responsibilization process, individual participation in Olympic preparations was widely solicited. For example, people were invited to vote on several of the selection processes for the design competition for the Olympic venues or the Olympic torch. People were also encouraged to participate in the image construction program itself by devising Olympic slogans, writing thematic songs, submitting photos and cartoons, illustrating proper behavior and Olympic ideals. Such personal involvement convinces people of their important role in this collective image construction process and make them feel personally responsible for the civilization and progress of the socialist nation. This responsibilization pressures people to comply to state-sanctioned notions of civility by suggesting that failure to do so will tarnish China's reputation, shame the nation, and compromise Beijing's costly image construction effort. Presenting the adoption of prescribed norms of behavior as a personal commitment and a self-imposed decision, this joint personalization and responsibilization process may also help foster voluntary compliance and minimize resistance against a top-down reform movement. Peer pressure also plays a part as people feel compelled to conform, to adapt to the behavior of those around them, and to subscribe to the dominant cultural norm. These individual tactic has been highly successful in devolving the role of enforcing the civilized norms into the hands of individuals and pushing some citizens to take it upon themselves to civilize Beijing's population. Some individuals have voluntarily begun acting as civilizing agents and formed citizens groups incorporated as NGOs to take on the task of reforming their peer. So the most famous is, of course, the Green Woodpeckers, which is an anti-spitting activist group. We have here, the man is the leader of this group, whose volunteer offer tissues to people as an alternative to spitting on the ground and try to convince offenders to change their ways. Another NGO acts as Beijing's English police and sends correct translations to businesses displaying bad English. These private initiatives have been very proficient enforcers, going as far as using public shaming as a deterrent by posting pictures of offenders on their websites for the world to see and using the power of face and personal image as a lever for social change. Active participation in the Olympic civilizing process has also involved mutual policing and surveillance, as local governments offer rewards for denouncing uncivilized behavior and for reporting violations. If much of the civilizing process rests on propaganda and discourse, the main mode of operation of this reform movement is performative. It is through active participation in state-sponsored activities that both body and mind are transformed and that state-sanctioned norms of behavior are internalized. In Beijing, embracing the games has thus become an embodied engagement to transform oneself and pursue Olympic civilization ideals on a daily basis. People are therefore encouraged to actively participate in the continuous flow of Olympic-related activities that have relentlessly punctuated the years leading to the Games. I will not list the incredible number of activities, but it is impressive. The pervasiveness of activities that facilitate acculturation into civilizing norms of behavior has allowed for this active participation to permeate everyday life. Dozens of clocks around the city counting down to the Games also create a sense of urgency, helping speed up the momentum and exert pressure upon people. Active participation has also served patriotic consolidation. It is by taking part in collective activities that people can directly experience the idea of a great civilization, contribute to the collective body of the nation, and feel part of a wider imagined community. But the most effective way to encourage proper behavior was to preach by the example. The Olympic civilization program thus rested upon the production of idealized citizens who represent social models to be emulated. Olympic propaganda makes profuse use of movie stars like Jackie Chan and athletic heroes like Youjeong or Andy Lau to embody the ideals of Olympic civilization. But more ordinary heroes, such as Olympic volunteers, have also been elevated to the status of iconic social models, idealized for their ethics, hard work, and desire to pride the nation. Images of the selfless Olympic volunteer, which dominate Olympic propaganda, seek to uplift the national psyche and inspire citizens by their loyalty and dedication to the motherland. Mainly recruited among Beijing's university students, these more than 100,000 volunteers are true selfless heroes, contributing to the Games with their unpaid labor as Olympic Village drivers, stadium hushers, media runners, ceremony performers, VIP hostesses and escorts, traffic supervisors, and translators. Required to be fluent in foreign languages, they receive training in proper etiquette, first aid, and basic security, and are taught how to smile and to interact with foreigners. As the incarnation of the multitude and idealized representatives of the Chinese population, they play a central role in the realization of an idealized community of civilized citizens. The civilizing process has thus helped constitute the ideal citizen as an iconic sign that will contribute to both national and urban image construction. This idealized citizen has come to signify citizenship by embodying the norms by which it should be defined. In this sense, the civilizing process has played a key role in creating a particular vision of what a citizen of modern China should be. As a corollary, those who fail to comply to this ideal, bring in question their very citizenship. Civilizing projects are usually defined by a fundamental inequality between the civilizing center and the peripheral people on which they act. They define citizenship through embodied practices that mark individuals and groups as appropriately or inappropriately civilized. Olympic civilization thus allowed for the discursive construction of certain members of society as uncivilized and therefore unworthy of citizenship rights, by introducing a new language of distinction that helped categorize and separate people. It has justified the emergence of new social hierarchies and power disparities. In Beijing, if some model citizens embody the key qualities of civilization and have come to stand for the nation as a whole, others who fail to embody this ideal have been denied representation as valued members of society. Absent from Olympic propaganda and marketing brochures are Beijing's massive migrants, who have been the main target of this civilizing campaign. Discursively depicted as a major threat to the image of civilized modernity conceived for the Games. Their crude manners and unhygienic habits, often the result of their own destitution and exploitation, are seen as proofs of their need for reform and make them unworthy of equal rights and opportunities. As the constitutive others of civilized urbanites, against whom they can construct their own identity as cosmopolitan and civilized, migrants have become victims of their own intractable otherness. The effects of this exclusion from collective representation are tangible. The ideological construction of the migrant as uncivilized, dangerous, and pathological has helped naturalize their subordination and exploitation and devaluate their labor. Marking the migrants as structurally irrelevant has also helped justify their further abuse and legitimate their exclusion from full citizenship rights. Even if they have greatly contributed to the Olympics through their labor and at times with their lives, migrants will likely be barred from active participation in the Olympic celebrations, even as simple bystanders. By criminalizing informal activities held by migrants, including unlicensed taxis or businesses, vagrancy and begging, the Olympic civilizing program helped justify their eviction from the city in the name of order and security by sending them back to their home village for the duration of the Games. Overall, the impact of the civilizing program have been mitigated. On the one hand, there has been a certain amount of cynicism and criticism among the general public. Decades of state propaganda and social engineering campaigns have left some contemptuous of party authority, and many deride yet another futile attempt to civilize society when all previous programs had failed. So another example of verbal recalcitrance where people rework, humorously rework the slogans. Many also admit suffering from slogan fatigue, numbed by the omnipresence of messages in an urban landscape already saturated by competing messages. The impact of the program is effectively weakened by the recuperation of Olympic symbols, icons, and slogans by commercial interests, which also confuses and dilutes the message. More lucid critiques privately condemn what they see as mere cosmetic social beautification and the state's excessive concern for image and appearances when more pressing social issues are left unresolved. They denounce the criminalization of behaviors which do not fit the official image of modernity by turning social norms into legislation and punishable offense, and view the Olympic civilization program as a thinly veiled tool of repression and control. One performance artist has used humor, ridicule, and irony to call into question the mass euphoria engineered by the relentless bombardment of Olympic propaganda, and to destabilize and subvert the consensus around the Games. In 2005, Zhao Baodi, also known as the Panda Man, declared that he could no longer wait and to stand the pressure, and decided to hold his own Olympic Games, Beijing Olympics, in Bern, Switzerland, a city named after the bear, which was very appropriate, complete with torch relay and opening ceremonies. And you have the mayor of the city in the National Stadium who's dressed in a Mao suit for the occasion. His fetish partner, the panda, which symbolizes China's self-representation as a benign hegemon and friendly superpower, was also omnipresent in the performance, so all athletes were dressed as pandas. But once again, these dissident voices have a limited impact on the Olympic civilization program. And in fact, a great majority of citizens support and welcome these initiatives and actively contribute to civilizing activities. So in many ways, the framing of the civilizing process within the harmonious society discourse was successful in creating consensus around its basic principles. Having been exposed to similar campaigns, people rarely view these disciplinary tactics as an intrusion of the state into their personal lives. Recent repression against outspoken journalists, cyber dissidents, and other activists have also intimidated potential protesters and encouraged self-policing. And most migrant workers that I have interviewed, or construction workers, about their fate during the Games, say they will willfully comply with state orders and go home if they were asked to. In conclusion, but it's a long conclusion, this paper has underlined some of the impacts of using mega events as an instrument of urban image construction and a tool of regeneration. Mega events often represent a short-sighted and regressive urban policy, which exacerbates pre-existing urban conflicts over the right to the city. In Beijing, Olympic transformations have been instrumental to the consolidation of economic and political power in the hands of a coalition of government leaders and private investors. They will be the main beneficiaries from public investments in the Olympics, profiting from land speculation and the channeling of public resources under public-private partnerships, while increasing their prominence in the city's symbolic economy, enhancing their control over the urban core, and playing a growing role in the decision-making process. By concentrating power in the hands of China's new rich, the Olympics will also have disenfranchised its new poor and made it easier to rule over a tame and unorganized population. The displacement of the underprivileged in the far suburbs, where access to basic services and jobs is limited, will not only further impoverish them, but the breaking of community networks will also limit their organizational power. The disciplinary procedures set in place by the civilizing process to internalize norms of good behavior will similarly facilitate social control through the production of docile political subjects. Coupling the civilization program with the Olympic spectacle also served as an instrument of national unification in a moment of rising instability and dissidence, allowing diverging interests to converge around a grand patriotic endeavor. Merging Olympic ideals with the state's dominant ideological program and presenting the Olympics in nationalist terms has allowed power holders to capitalize upon the spectacle's power of mystification. As a liberating social moment and an important focus for collective energies that mobilizes an increasingly divided people around a common cause, the Olympic spectacle was essential to refocus popular attention away from the shortcomings of China's marketization and to successfully conceal rising social inequities. By converting pent-up frustrations into patriotic fervor, the state-induced Olympic euphoria thus acted as an instrument of pacification, neutralizing discontent and dispelling possibilities of contestation. The Olympics were thus instrumentalized by the state to promote national cohesion and restore national stability. The Olympics also contributed to the symbolic maintenance of the nation-state and the reinvention of China's imagined community, both through Olympic propaganda and on the bodies of the city's inhabitants. Furthermore, the paper also demonstrates that urban image construction is a highly selective and exclusionary process that imposes a single-stranded vision onto urban diversity. In their attempt to create a new, identifiable, and marketable representation of the city, image construction programs reduce place identity to a constricted and easily packaged urban product that reflects the aspirations of a powerful elite and the values and expectations of potential investors and tourists. Many of the concerns addressed by these programs are thus based not on local priorities, but on the perceived conditions of belonging to global society. Beijing's Olympic image thus represents a carefully constructed frame through which to see the city, the nation, and their inhabitants. These programs have helped materialize part of this restricted vision and resulted in the exclusion of certain population groups from collective representation by removing them from certain sectors of the city or labeling their behavior as uncivilized. Urban images must thus be read as ideology, as historical products behind whose unified appearance lie struggles between various groups over access to resources and representation. This paper also demonstrates some of the limits of mega events as a long-term marketing strategy. First, by destroying Beijing's historical fabric and obliterating its unique cultural landscape. Olympic projects have also annihilated part of the city's competitive advantage by erasing the particularities that gave Beijing its distinctive flavor. By conforming to a hegemonic vision of modernity, this entrepreneurial strategy of urban distinction constitutes a homogenizing process which promotes sameness and conformity to world-established models and results in a loss of diversity. Furthermore, the creative destruction brought about by Olympic projects also threatens to reduce the city to a local variation on a predictable theme and to turn Beijing into a generic global metropolis. The Beijing Olympics will remain in the historic annals of event planning as the epitome of the total spectacle, controlled and fine-tuned in every aspect, from the behavior of local inhabitants to the visual reordering of the city, all the way to air quality and even weather, as I mentioned before, one of the most unpredictable environmental conditions. This was made possible not only thanks to the authoritarian state power and seemingly endless economic resources, but also with the voluntary contribution of a population whose lives may be deeply affected by this event. But despite rigorous attempts to fully control the image and discourse surrounding the Olympics, the power of the state to monopolize the construction of meaning remains limited. As we have seen, images and discourses are never fully under the control of their producers, but can be reworked, altered, and contested through everyday acts of symbolic discontents. Events of the last few weeks demonstrate how investing in expensive mega events as a means of image construction also remains a high-risk business, and how image construction efforts can easily be tarnished as different interest groups use the international media presence generated by the event as a platform to voice their discontent and make their plight heard. The Beijing Olympics will thus remain a field of contestation in which conflicting discourses are produced by distinct interest groups fighting for attention. As the games come and go and the Olympic euphoria dissipates, people will make full realization of the impacts of recent urban transformations. We will see if the seeds of resistance that were planted will be allowed to bloom and to bring about some change. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. Emery, it's a very interesting overview from the culture critiques perspective. But I promised in the beginning that I will do the part on the destruction rather than the construction behind. Yeah. So this is my story. I will be focusing on the social protests and the protesters, their grievances, their demands, and their strategies, how they protest and why they protest. By looking at this very loosely defined group in Chinese, now they have a new identity called Cai Qianhu. Literally, it means evicted households whose homes were demolished. Cai means demolish, and Qian means relocation. These are the households whose homes are demolished and they are relocated, and most of them are forcefully relocated. And as we can imagine, the faster the pace of construction, as you see here in Emery's images, the faster the pace of destruction. The greater the scale of construction there is, the greater the scale of destruction. So between 1990 and 2004, as Emery has pointed out, we do not really have any accurate or reliable or creditable statistics, but the official statistics, that is, from Beijing's Bureau of Statistics, says that about 500,000 households, not individuals, households, and were evicted and relocated in Beijing. So this is not just particularly for the Beijing Games, but that's about, in the space of 15 years, you have 500,000 official, according to the official statistics, households evicted and relocated. So here, this is their stories. Their grievances, so their complaints, they have a protest, and their grievances actually come from multiple sources. But I will focus on these two main sources of grievances that these protesters have. One is about unfair compensation. So compensation, you have two types of ways of looking at why it's unfair and how unfair it is. One is the absolute number, very low rates in any event, absolute number of cash compensation is low, yeah? Lower than what? Lower than the market rates. If you really take your piece of land to the market, how much more you will get. So this is absolute low compensation rates, so they feel it's not enough. The other thing is relatively low, meaning when they compare with other relocated households in other districts who know better about to negotiate with the relocation officers and staff members and so on. So this is a discriminatory compensation that they are complaining about. So in any event, this is most of them complain about this unfairness in their compensation. The other thing, major things that they complain about is forced eviction and relocation. So many of them were relocated involuntarily, and some of them experience violence. Physical confrontations is very usual. Gangsters' involvement is not unheard of. And not just the fact that they are evicted involuntarily, but also the relocation housing. When they are allocated some kind of relocation housing, they have no choice. There's no input of relocatees for them to decide where they want to relocate. Their relocation housing is designated without their input. So they are put away in the far away, remote urban fringe areas, 1 or 2 hours at least bus ride from where they used to live. So that also means an hour or 2 bus ride away from urban services, from your social networks and support systems, and your jobs. So that kind of relocation is also a very destructive process of livelihood in general. So this is another thing that they complain about, is forced relocation and designated relocation housing that's being allocated to them without the consideration of all these livelihood support systems. Now, with this kind of grievances, I want to just point out the cause of this unfair compensation. Why there's all this unfair compensation? In addition to this usual implementation gap between the policy and the delivery of the policy, for example, when the law says this many square meters of home should be compensated with this number of square meters of home somewhere else, how many rooms, depends on how many people are in the household and so on and so forth. But when it comes to delivery, there's always a big discount, or they are not fully paid, the relocation housing is much further away than what they are told, and so there is that gap. Okay, so in addition to this kind of implementation gap, there is also a structural reason for this unfair compensation, especially because of these two institutions. One is the state land tenure. So when it comes to compensation, then we will ask, what's being compensated? Whether it's the home, the house, the materials, the bricks and the columns and the roof and the floor, or it's the land. So because all urban land in China still belongs to the state. This is still being enshrined and reaffirmed in the recently passed property rights law. So when it comes to compensation for urban relocatees, it's not the land that's being compensated, it's the home, the house. So it's the buildings, not the land. So the price, therefore, differentiates a lot. And these are for the homeowners. There are still some private homeowners who recover their home ownership, not land ownership, during the 90s and early 2000s. These are homeowners from the pre-revolution times. Now their home ownership is being given back to them. But their compensation, when it comes to demolition, their compensation is still only on the basis of their home, the house, not the land. So that makes it much lower than the market rates for the land. And for the tenants of this public housing that's being demolished, their compensation rates are calculated on the basis of land use rights, not land ownership rights. Yet another institution that legitimizes this very low compensation rates for both groups of homeowners and tenants, to the extent that they will get about 1 to 3% of the value of what this piece of land really is worth in the market. To say the most, 1 to 3% if they are fully paid. In many cases, they are not fully compensated because of these, again, delivery or implementation gaps that I mentioned. Now, this is one institution as a root of this unfair compensation. It's because of a land tenure system in Chinese cities today. Another institution that explains this very low compensation rates for these Cai-Qian-Hu is that in a Chinese system, when it comes to the calculation, they have a property appraisal, how much your home is worth, and then they have how much cash that you are entitled to, and so on. And also they take into account the number of household members you have, so based on the land use rights and tenants' rights and so on. However, any of these calculation in official calculation charts and tables, location, one of the most important, if not the most factors of deciding the value of property is not taken into account. Location doesn't really matter in this case of calculation of the compensation rates. As a result of that, people feel that they are very much exploited because their location, the most premium land in the inner city of Beijing, they got very low flat compensation rate, as much or not much more than those who live outside of the third ring of Beijing. Now, it has been changing recently, but the difference is still does not reflect the market value or the difference of the market value of these different land in different locations. So they feel, well, they exploited that way as well. So these are the two institutions that explain the, how these people feel, the Cai-Qian-Hu feel they are very unfairly compensated in this process, and that's one of the roots of their grievances. Another thing another cause of the grievance is, as I said, it's not structural but procedural. This very violent or abrupt, to say the least, process of relocation, and how they are just forced to move from one location to another, not out of their choice. So if you do not want to move to where you are supposed to move to, so this office or the staff of the Office of Demolition and Relocation will just grab your belongings and move them to the designated relocation housing unit without your consent. So their stuff is being just packed and moved, and they are still trying to struggle and to fight against the system and so on. So that whole procedure, without any of the relocatees in the Tsai Chien-Hu's input, because of these forced eviction and relocation process, becomes another big source of complaints for this Tsai Chien-Hu. And it's not just they don't want to move there, it's because the destination of this relocation housing is invariably very far from where they live, where they work, and where they get their services, schooling for children, or health care for the elderly, and so on. So it's really a destruction of a livelihood to begin with, and a creation of a new type of urban poverty in this process of relocation. Now, they started protest since the mid-90s. They take actions through legal processes. This is what Kevin was writing about. Very much, this group especially, very much following this process of lawful on resistance, and in their framework, rightful resistance as well. However, this Tsai Chien-Hu's struggle in the city, we have to put it in a very specific context, which is when, by the time they start to take action, to struggle, to protest, to start the litigation, and so on and so forth, their homes are already gone. Their home, most of them, their houses are already demolished, and they're already relocated or evicted. So the very material existence of the evidence of their any rights to that particular place, to that particular piece of land in that particular neighborhood is gone. And there's a very good reason for the developers and their officials and allies to demolish these houses as soon as possible, because most of these residents in the inner city area do not have titles, do not have any legal documents that prove their ownership rights. And since they don't have ownership rights, even when they have a home ownership rights, not land ownership rights, and many of them still do not really have the titles. And therefore, the physical existence of their home is the only evidence of their rights to the city. It's the only historical document which is embodied in this physical form of the house that they live there. They live in this particular place, in this particular neighborhood. And when they complain about unfair compensation, and one of the reasons for the unfair compensation is inadequate or unfair appraisal of the property. Yeah, they measure, how many square meters there is in this room and that room, but they will complain that they will take it, these staff of the demolition and relocation office to court and say, well, the measurement is not right. We need to do a reappraisal of my property to give me a better compensation. But in order to do that reappraisal, when they are successful in court, the judge says, okay, you can do reappraisal. You have to go back to the house to remeasure the whole thing, but the thing's gone. The house is gone. So there is no way for them to do the reappraisal. So in order to discourage these people from taking the staff of the Office of Demolition and Relocation to court, they would destroy the house. So, to discourage these people from pursuing these issues any further, especially from taking it to court. And therefore, they will be more ready to settle and to take whatever is offered to them as a compensation. So this very rapid pace of demolition is also a very important strategy on the part of the developer in the Office of Demolition and Relocation to discourage any further of these disputes and litigation. So they will be looking at the house and hoping that they will get a fair compensation. But by the time they manage to get a court order or reappraisal, the evidence is gone. Now, under such circumstances, what do these Cai Jianhu do? Under such pressure, no evidence, and houses are being demolished, and they still feel very unfairly treated. Their relocation housing is extremely inadequate. So they try to use some discursive tactic to keep the past alive and to maintain the presence of the disappeared, while the developers and their government allies attempt to write off their association with their old homes and their old neighborhoods. Most of all, these discursive politics and the tactics that I will describe to you with some examples right after this, this kind of discursive politics of memory in Cai Jianhu's struggle for fairer compensation and rights to choose the place of residency are intertwined with their legal implications of this dispute. So it's both a discursive politics and it's also a legal strategy for this Cai Jianhu to sort of revoke the past, the history, their past sort of association with the home that's already destroyed, the neighborhood that's already disappeared. So one of such example that I found very telling is this dispute starting in 2005. In 2005, the central government of China initiated a renewal of resident identification card nationwide. So all citizens in China have to renew their citizen ID card, or resident ID card, that is. One of the most important pieces of information in this residence ID card is their address. You have to update your address in this new ID card. You have to, in the most current one, the place you actually live. And so these Cai Jianhu were requested to put their new address on this new ID card. New address meaning the address of their relocation housing. Not the old homes, but the new home. But then these Cai Jianhu protesters refused to put the new address in their new ID card. They insisted they want to put their old address in their new ID card. So their argument is that the new home is a result of this illegal, illegitimate action of the government, and forced relocation and eviction. Nothing is legit, nothing is legal, so we will not recognize this new address, this new housing. So we still think that we have the rights to our old home. So we want the old address in the ID card. And even though the old home is gone, the site has already been raised into grounds, and new commercial projects and luxurious condos are already on where their home used to be, they still insisted on having the old address on this card. And their argument is that, because we still own that, even it's not there anymore. So it's discursive in a way that they will want to preserve that past, that memory. But it also, this tactic has a very important legal implication in their struggle as well, because they feel precisely because the physical disappearance of these houses, the only evidence, legal evidence they have, no titles, no any other evidence, the only legal evidence they have is the address being recorded in this legal document called ID card they own. So in order to go back to any sort of, to court, to demand, to claim, to reclaim their rights over that particular piece of land in the premium location of an inner city neighborhood, they got to have the old address in this ID card. So they feel this is the only attachment, the only evidence they can hold on to. So that kind of legal argument, together with this discursive argument about how they actually have the full rights and full claim to the old home, makes it an interesting example of how in the physical disappearance of the home, they still continue their struggle. Another interesting example that I found in such a mixture of discursive and legal tactic among these Chai-Chien Hu employed, is about not just about invoke the memory of the past, but also denial the present, or denial the new home. They want the home that is already disappeared. They also deny the new home that they are allocated to. So there is a case in which a lot of these relocatees, these Chai-Chien Hu, in their new housing, allocated, designated new housing units, before they relocate, they were told that by the staff of the relocation office that it's going to be like a property swap. They will give up their old home in the inner city, and then in exchange, they will get a new unit in the urban or suburban area. So they will have the full rights over these new units, just like what they had before with their old homes. But by the time they actually move out and resettle in a new home, and they realize they don't actually own even the home, of the home ownership does not belong to them. They become tenants to the developers of these new homes in the suburban or urban fringe areas. Now they owe rents to the developers. They owe management fees to the developers. They also have the fines for contract violation because they never pay, so they also violate some kind of contract they never see. So they owe a lot of money, basically, especially rents, to these developers. And so they would say, well, then we won't pay, because if we pay this rent, that means we recognize the whole process of demolition, relocation. But since, again, same argument about how the whole process is illegitimate and illegal, so they would refuse to pay the rent to this new housing. But again, it's not just about denial or delegitimize this whole process of forced relocation, but also legally, there is a very interesting implication in this campaign of refusing this rent payments. That is, since 1995, Beijing government, the Beijing municipal government, stopped hearing any disputes initiated by Chai-Chien Hu. If Chai-Chien Hu initiated litigation, taking the developer to court, or taking the local Chai-Chien Ban, demolition and relocation staff to court, the court of Beijing, district court, People's Court in Beijing, simply refused to either accept the case or hear the case. So the case will never be established in a court if it's initiated by Chai-Chien Hu themselves. And since they refuse to pay the rent, they are actually taken to court by developers because they don't pay the rent. So they become a defendant. And through this very sort of different route, they enter the judicial system as a defendant rather than a plaintiff. But after they enter the court system, they will reverse their status, and they will sue the developers, and then become a plaintiff that way. Yeah, so this is the only way they enter the system. And so it doesn't take too long before they realize this is actually the only way for them to go into the court system. So many of them become a plaintiff after they are taken into the court as a defendant. And then they start their argument and so on. So this is the way they see how they can change their status, and they can somehow hoping to shift their position from reactive defendants to proactive challengers of this ruthless process of urban redevelopment. And by 2004, this litigation over rent payment has spread throughout the outer ring of the city, many neighborhoods. And these Chai-Chien Hu learned this tactic, and then they just stop paying, or they never pay the rent, and it becomes a more widespread tactic in those areas. And these different groups in different neighborhoods, in both in the inner city areas and also in these relocation housing sites, eventually form a very important mobilization network, to the extent that by 2000, about 10,000 plaintiffs organized this thing called 万人大诉讼, 10,000 grand litigation of more than 10,000 plaintiffs involved. Of course, their case was never accepted by court. They are suing Beijing's Land Management Bureau, but they continue. Every year, every February, they will take their case to court and hoping to establish this case, but they are never accepted. They continue mobilization, mass legal education, and so on. So by 2003, they managed to mobilize another 30,000 people, not just 10, but 30,000 people, to organize a grand petition and revelation. It's not litigation, it's petition and revelation, 大举报. They are, 举报陈希同, the party secretary, the big boss in Beijing during the massive construction time. And then 2 years later, there was another grand revelation of a similar scale. So yes, I still do not see this kind of mobilization as organized, as to the extent that we can call it an urban movement. Urban movement, if you ask Manuel Castell's definition, it has to be something much more institutionalized type of mobilization. It really should have the effect of changing the overall power structure and political institution of the city to be qualified, quote unquote, as an urban social movement. I do not see that happen. However, I do see some interesting implication that we can probably speculate on from these very fragmented observation of urban Cai Qianhu's mobilization. One optimistic sort of conclusion, I will have an optimistic one and pessimistic one. A more optimistic conclusion we can draw from this kind of mobilization is that it seems to me many of these protesters have gone beyond these narrowly defined or legally or legalistically defined concept of property rights. Yeah, it's not about because if you look at these 万人大诉讼, these 10,000 grand litigation of 10,000 plaintiffs, this event in 2000, which continued actually for 10 years, 8 years, up till last year, 7, yeah, 7, and this year I'm not sure, yeah, up to 2007. Actually, only 60% of them, we did a survey. It's not the whole of the 10,000 people, but it's sort of a sampling of 600 out of these 10,000. Only 60% of the surveyed 600 plaintiffs are homeowners. 40% of them are tenants. They are not property owners, but they still feel that they have the entitlement and to make a moral claim over their rights to the city. So I call them the residence rights rather than property rights. And it's a much broader view of how they see their place in the city and their entitlement to their place in the city and to their neighborhood, to this urban services, and so on. So that kind of broadened view of property rights, it seems to me, is a very important step forward and broadening of what we used to think about, well, property owners are the motors, are the driving forces behind this kind of urban movement, demanding more citizenship rights and so on. Actually, slightly less than half of these people are not property owners, still feeling entitled for, to such rights to the city. And I think that's interesting for us to explore more. So that's my optimistic conclusion of this. Now, my pessimistic conclusion from these observations is that, well, this mobilization is still, this is very similar to Qin Li's observation in her study of the labor protests. It's very localized and rather cellularized. Although they make some kind of cross-neighborhood loose networks, but never really do these inner city protesters find themselves having any sort of a thing in common with those in the periphery, those suburban peasants, or they don't find themselves have much in common with peasants in even more remote areas. So these are people who think, well, these are urban residents, making these claims over urban land. And we don't have anything in common with those peasants making claims over collective land. So you see this class line is still very much vivid or in presence when it comes to this community-based mobilization. So that classical debates between whether class or community is the motor of urban social changes. In this particular case, we don't see the alliance across the class line in this community-based urban mobilization. So that will be my pessimistic conclusion from this observation. So I will welcome discussion after Youjeong's presentation. So here we will have case from Korea on the two mega events in Seoul. One is the Olympic Games in 1988. The other is the World Cup game between Japan and Korea in 2002.
I'm a PhD student in geography department on this campus. And okay, I'm going to talk about how these two sports events have transformed the Korean society during the 2 decades. Modern Olympic Games have been a field to show power or capabilities of hosting countries, and the Games did some part in enhancing political status of hosting governments. But the stories about Seoul Olympic is totally different from that typical pattern. Actually, the Olympics toppled down the military regime. Post-war Korea, after the 1950s, was ruled by 2 military dictators, Park Chung-hee and Chun Doo-hwan. And Park Chung-hee controlled the South Korea over 20 years, and he was assassinated in 1979. And after his death, another military general, Chun Doo-hwan, waged a military coup and seized the power, right? And after that event, to stabilize the social unrest, Chun Doo-hwan initiated a martial law throughout the whole country. And in response to that, there are several social protests calling for the resignation of the military dictatorship and the further democratization. In response to that social protest, actually, the Chun Doo-hwan regime dispatched the military troops to quell that protest. And this image is about the famous 1980 Gwangju civil uprising and the massacre by the state. And this happened in 1980, And the South Korea was awarded the Olympic Games in 1981. So it was really apparent that the military regime aimed to harness the Olympic Games to promote its political legitimacy under such shaky foundations. But ironically, the Olympic bid helped the overthrow of this regime. And 6 years later, in 1987, there was a nationwide civil uprising called June Civil Uprising there. And the society demanded the resignation of the military regime and further democratization. And actually, this event is one of the most significant events in contemporary Korean history. And the result of this public uprising was the June 29th declaration. And it was about the resignation of Chun Doo-hwan regime and the introduction of direct presidential election system in South Korea. Here in the public uprising, it is in question where the society bore the Olympic Games in mind in calling for their demands for democratization. But the public uprising ahead of such big international event cast huge pressure to the state, actually. And surrounding the uprising, the international scrutiny, the international media's attention really increased. And then president of IOC, International Olympic Committee, Juan Antonio Samaranch, the man in the middle, he visited Korea only 2 days before the June 29th declaration. And he met with political leaders in Korea to resolve this issue. So some scholars argue that the Olympic Games actually brought down the military regime. So for example, Han Sung-ju notes that, quote, the Olympics played a pivotal role in bringing democracy to the country only because intensifying world scrutiny made it difficult for the state to deal harshly with those demands from society. And another scholar, Gerald Mainheim, suggests that, quote, this outside scrutiny and pressure increased the likelihood that the response of the state would represent a significant movement towards further democratization, end quote. And so that's the argument of some scholars. But in general, Korean academics seek the cause of the success of that uprising in the pan-national movements. So not only blue-collar workers and students, but also white-collar workers, cultural elites, and political leaders in the opposition parties all together participated in this uprising. So such national-scale demonstrations actually brought the military regime down, and the Olympics and international factors did some parts in that political transformation. So therefore, very ironically, the government's goal of using the Olympics to enhance its own legitimacy effectively backfired. And so rather than being a momentum for sustaining the political status quo, the Olympics marked a restructuring of a political system in South Korea. So that's 20 years ago. Well, another very short story about the Olympics is in 1980, America and Western European countries boycotted the games in Moscow. And 4 years later, in 1984, the Eastern European countries did not participate in Los Angeles Games. So actually, the 1988 Seoul Olympic Games was a decade-long pan-nation political event. right? So to embrace these Eastern European countries, actually there was huge transformation in dealing with ideology in Korean society, because under the military regimes, the state mobilized the anti-communist ideology to control or educate the society. But now, I mean, that anti-communist ideology became to be loosened or partly dismantled both by the state and society based on this event. Okay, that was about the Seoul Olympics. And around 2002, we had World Cup. And between these two events, in the 1990s, South Korea had two civilian governments, two civilian elected governments, as opposed to military leadership. And lots of civic groups emerged. And they started to address social issues as well as political issues. And really one interesting phenomenon in that at that time was the emergence of young generations. I mean, until the 1980s, the generations were named after the political events or historical events. And now, in this time, generations were named according to their new modes of thoughts, their new modes of culture, their new modes of expressing their thoughts. And in the 2002 World Cup Games, that kind of young social energy was really exploded. So I'm going to show what happened in the World Cup Games with a short movie. Okay.
하루는 상제님께서 말씀하시기를 심심하니 세상이 한번 우끈하게 웃을 일을 꾸며보리라.
A long time ago, one person
너희들은
said
앉아서
there will be really
웃어보아라.
big fun in this
많이
country, and
미칠
that actually
것이라
happened in
하시니라.
2002. So do you get a sense? Okay, so in 2002 World Cup Games, the South Korea produced two astonishing events. The first one is Team Korea went on to the semifinals for the first time in their World Cup history. And second thing is millions of Koreans gathered together and cheered the Team Korea. And the world actually was astonished by this street cheering event rather than the team's victories. So, okay. This is a central Seoul. And the idea of cheering was proposed by the supporters of Team Korea called Red Devils. And they produced their own T-shirts like Be the Reds, and it became huge in Korea. So they started very informal or unofficial groups, consisting of those who like soccer. So they proposed, okay, let's gather together and watch a soccer game together because it's so much fun rather than watching alone. So you see the big screens, and there are several other screens there, and they gathered together and watched the game and cheered together like this. And later, this kind of strict cheering event was spread into the whole nation, whole society. So, because the South Korea went on to the semifinals, so as Korea advanced further into the tournament, the number of supporters all wearing red continued to snowball, creating great seas of red like this. And so police released the statistics that about 1 out of every 2 Koreans took part in street cheering during the World Cup. So actually, the color of red represented the communism under the military regimes. So the use of red color was really discouraged. Now there are the seas of reds and red waves. So it shows how the Korean society has transformed from red complex to red fever. And the massive World Cup street cheering brought 3 significant developments in South Korea. First, it manifested enthusiasm of Koreans and was developed into national festivals. And second, the Team Korea's victories enhanced the pride of Koreans, and this passionate gathering of millions of Koreans actually strengthened the national unity. And third, the street cheering experience brought about other public gatherings to address various social issues much later, and that significantly contribute to establish the creation of a public discourse in Korean society. And let me start with the festival theme. The World Cup cheering displays its explosive power through the sheer number of gathered people and their collective actions. During the World Cup, the cheering mass manifested itself as a public body by wearing the same red shirts and performing the same motions collectively, as you saw in the movie. And the public body is able to draw on the vast range of social consensus, as well as its visual power and symbolic image of the masses. World Cup fever was about a collective expression of desires, energies, angers, and frustrations. Koreans had been controlled in their ability to express their beliefs and ideologies under the manipulation of oppressive military regimes and the controlled media. And those latent emotions were exploded altogether through the medium of soccer as cheers and jubilations, as excitement and shouts, and as enthusiastic festivals. Koreans expressed complicated emotions in the form of cheering rather than violence. the color, the style, the motions, and songs all together promoted the liberation. So the World Cup became a motivation, and the substance was freedom, liberation from very restrictive social customs and public scrutiny. And on the other hand, the Korea-Japan World Cup in 2002, Koreans projected its individual subjectivity into the victories of a Korean national team. And through the enormous red waves of people in the streets, Koreans visually represent and imagine the community. But we can find really one intriguing aspect in this event, because society, rather than the state or the mass media, actually the society led the nation identity building. During the street cheering, Koreans put the Korean nationality up front with like this national flag and the cheering slogan you saw in the movie, 대한민국 밥. So 대한민국 literally refers to Republic of Koreans. So the name of Korea, the name of the country, was shouted by millions of people together, thousands of times during that event. And the media only followed the society's lead and took actions much later. I mean, broadcasting companies were inspired by the festival-like aspects of a public gathering, and they held concerts and public events much later, following the society's lead. And the building is City Hall of Seoul, and it was very busiest transportation node in city of Seoul. And the municipal state decided to turn that transportation node into a public space after the World Cup. So society shaped the creation of a public space like this. Another aspect about this World Cup was voluntary participation, voluntary organization. You see the card sections, and this is about the Olympics in 1988, and this is World Cup. And this opening ceremony was really well prepared and well manipulated by the state. And these card sections is totally organized by supporters themselves. And this mega national flag was flown from the bottom to the top, and is also organized by supporters themselves. So voluntary participation, so not artificially created by political leadership, nor by other countries' influence, but through sports and victories, through new cultural codes, a positive and progressive national unity was created. So this shows a stark contrast from the state-inspired and state-imposed nationalism during the World Olympics. Well, actually, the World Cup street cheering was really nothing more than play. So people were really excited, and they want to feel joy. So there was no overt political ideology there. But through the World Cup street cheering, the masses, the Korean masses, experienced the pleasure of participation. Koreans became aware of the power of mass gatherings. So this precious experience had effects, much effects later in transforming society. So I'm gonna introduce one example about candlelight vigils like this. I mean, in June 2002, two middle school Korean girls were killed by US military. And actually, the Korean police did not investigate the accident because of the so far status of force agreement between the US and Korea. So actually, the charged soldiers were acquitted later by a US military court, and that triggered huge public ire among Koreans. So people, through the internet, they proposed to gather together with candles at the same place as the World Cup cheering events. So tens of thousands of Koreans gathered together with candles like this, and that candlelight vigil actually continued for about several months. But there was no obvious connection, political connection between these two events, but the candlelight vigil actually used the similar mode, actually the same space and very similar mode of organization, voluntarily organized, non-violent, and very symbolic. But at this time, there was no shouting. It was very silent. But I'm sorry. The silent protest actually had much, much greater impact compared to other protests in the past. So, and the protests, the candlelight vigils were generously accepted by society and engendered other protests for various social issues later. And in that year, 2002, South Korea had a presidential election. And that election was largely divided by old conservative candidate and young liberal candidate. And most young generations, younger people supported the young candidate. And actually, he is the previous president of Korea, Roh Moo-hyun. And so the people used the experience of World Cup again in promoting their political demands, in promoting the Roh Moo-hyun's political campaign, and at this time wearing yellow T-shirts and yellow balloons represent those desires. And these kind of gatherings, voluntary gatherings from supporters of Roh Moo-hyun actually won huge attention from the entire nation. And finally, the Roh Moo-hyun won the election and became a president. And these young generations, young masses, became to be aware of their political power, their political participation power. So they emerged as a really significant actor in transforming society and politics in Korea. The public actions of 2002 overwhelmed the influence of the state and made the state follow the society's lead. But the collective public actions were also accepted by the state due to their nationalistic discipline. The mass emerged as a significant actor in transforming society. The mass came to bear critical interest on social issues, and they learned how to organize their interests and their demands into actual actions. Because the mass public gatherings in 2002 were politically effective and socially influential, a series of other public gatherings have occurred continuously since then. Whereas the nature of public mass gatherings for the World Cup was an act of unity and excitement. But the source for the candlelight protest was contestation. The diverse and differentiated contestations within society, as well as their proactive expressions, are rearing further possibilities for expression of democracy. And with the series of developments over time, the meaning of space has also changed. The Seoul City Hall Plaza and Gwanghwamun intersection was the site of political and labor protest during the 1980s under the repressive military regimes. With the World Cup, they became a site for public gathering and festivals. Going through the candlelight protest and presidential election in 2002, the space became a physical public sphere in which various social issues are dealt with and addressed. So from a space of political struggles to a space of national enthusiasm and to a space of contagious discourses within society. So here we could find that that particular space, the City Hall Plaza and Gwanghwamun intersections, were deeply marked into the mentality of Koreans, and the spaces actually opened up such opportunity for Koreans to gather together and wage political actions. So space is not only a container of events. Space shapes the events, and society shapes the public space. Okay, yeah, this is what I have.
Well, thank you, Youjeong. And so, well, the floor is open for questions. We have 25 minutes. Yeah, Jia-Qin.
Question for Professor Hsing. It kind of sits between your pessimistic and your optimistic conclusions. Given your discussion of the expanded social notions of property that occurred during the 2000 to 2007 mobilizations, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the importance of the salience of the constitutional amendment in 2004 and then the new property law in 2007 to forming the formation or the I'm not sure how you would characterize it, but the class line that you were discussing that's tied to property. How are these new legal definitions of property impacting understandings and developments of class difference?
You know, the new property laws that you mentioned, 2007, really did not touch upon any fundamental definition. What should I do? Should I use the mic? Okay. Really did not touch upon the fundamental definition of what property is in China. Yeah, it touches upon some technical aspects of it, such as better compensation, definition of what can be and should be compensated in a much more refined, sort of detailed way, for example, and the procedural of demolition actually was better outlined and substantiated in this new set of law. But never was the definition of what property rights should sit on or should be expanded or, broadened, or really whether private, property rights should ever be considered as part of the agenda was debated in the internet among legal scholars, liberal intellectuals, but it's never really put in words. Yeah, so that news, that's what a lot of people were disappointed. So, there's a lot of sort of debates and a lot of half-pops of, property rights. However, it does have an interesting discursive impact, which is, regardless of the content of these property rights, just the very fact that there is a discussion of property rights give the room for the Caijianhu to argue back with the Caijianban, the office, and the staff. They will say, because there is a discussion of property rights, that means whoever use or own the home of the property presumably have some more rights, regardless of what that rights is. If no one really reads item by item of what that right, those set of law is, but they will use this. So now the state allows us to discuss this, so we can argue. It's a reference point, it's a platform, and it gives the possibility, it gives the space, but it does not really have that substantive sort of support. But then they use it anyway, so they will be arguing, well, now we are having these new property law, so we can demand this and that, and then they add whatever they think is proper into that debate anyway. Yeah, so it's actually an interesting development. Unlike, it's not what it says, it's what it generates or engenders this, this possibility. So I think that's more interesting than what really the legal sort of, the text is. Yeah. Any other?
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
From Montreal. Is it Broudehoux or?
It's okay, even in French, nobody.
Yeah. One of the goals of the Olympics is nationalism, creating a new sense of identity and pride. It would seem if that were a goal, although the Free Tibet demonstrations have been embarrassing to some extent, yet it seems to have thrown fuel on the fire of what the government wanted. Could you comment on that and how that might also
I've been surprised. I was really, I'm sorry, but I'm not an expert. I don't, but yes, I think it's a very, personally, I was surprised on how it went, and also even the way the French collectively responded very strongly to the Tibetan cause, and then were attacked in China very overtly. So yes, it has had, actually, the Tibetan cause has brought people, yeah, I do think so. But I think there are experts who could.
Are there any implications of how that might affect the so-called negotiations or discussions with the Dalai Lama?
I'm not going to go there, but yes. Yes, no, I will not speculate.
Okay.
I haven't followed if the door was a little bit open for the Dalai Lama, but I haven't. So sorry.
I just wanted to comment on the question, but also I was in Beijing during the times when the Free Tibet torch relays and all that stuff was happening.
So he will speculate.
I think part of what happened was what the media portrays in China and what the people see did fuel fire onto the situation, because of what the Chinese people saw was what the government wanted them to see, so then it helped fuel the nationalisms to the French and all that kind of thing.
Hi, I have a question for Hsing. You said how the Thailand the people who protested the one after the house got demolished. It doesn't pertain to only the city of Beijing, correct? Like, does it also happen in Shanghai with the?
Oh yeah. It's only because I studied Beijing, so because we talk about Beijing today, so.
So this case could be correlated to like other cities in China, right?
Yes.
Like Guangzhou or Shanghai in terms of their 2010 World Expo. So
Yeah.
the way so your pessimistic views is that their compensation is never going to be like fully realized in the case, or how might the gradual opening of how the society would go after these two major international events, like which path should the government take in terms of like judicial issues, like how the politics, the law. Like I remember in the Chinese Constitution law, they have the freedom of speech and like what it should be promised, but then the party pretty much clamps down on it, or what the people can say in terms of what they see and hear in society.
So can you sort of rephrase your question? It's not quite clear to me. Yeah.
How else can the migrants improve the situation other than just by complaining, or in terms of like it seems like they're pretty much stuck in nowhere to go in the corner. In terms of the house going to be demolished anyway. In terms of how they get pushed out. Like
No, I'm not so sure if I will agree with your conclusion that there is like totally a motionless, passive state of these peasants or workers or these Caiqianhu. As I said, there are numerous, increasing number and cases and frequency of protest, litigation, petition, and these are all sort of tactics and paths people take to voice their grievances and hoping to make some of their demands met. So they are trying, and some of them are successful to a certain extent. As I said, if you look at the my sort of optimistic view of it, there are much increased consciousness of rights to begin with, and also some kind of belief that their actions will lead to some results. And that expectation, that hopefulness, sometimes does play an important role in mobilizing. Of course, no one, mobilization by definition, no one can predict the results. But this very process of mobilization and the politics generated from such mobilization does mean quite a bit. This is slow yet sure process if, in many ways. So I won't agree that this is just it's the same old story all over again. I'm not sure if I agree with you on that. So that's one answer to your question. And the other thing that I can think of is that it's not just consciousness at a sort of ideological level, or it's more than that. It's really the organizational skill and capacity that's also being nurtured in this process. How they, these seemingly very fragmented so-called mass legal education workshops organized here and there in a very sort of random, irregular, mobile way in different parts of the city. This time, this will happen in this neighborhood. Next time, you'll be in another place. You will see them highly fragmented. And there's no even a fixed place where people meet, So how much less organized can this be? But at the same time, you will see this is precisely because they are so fragmented, they're allowed to continue. Yeah, so that you turn around, you see that's why they avoid a lot of these unnecessary intervention or scrutiny by public security. Because they're just small and they don't have regular meetings. So today they are here, tomorrow they don't show up anymore. So that kind of thing actually is can be viewed as both a positive or helpful thing and the negative thing about lack of organization and so on. So it depends on how you view it. So overall, if I don't believe in mobilization, I do believe in human creativity. The creative energy, I think, is even better released and mobilized under pressure. And that's why any planned economy needs a very big informal economy to support. Yeah.
Another question for you. I just wondered, in your research, did you ever come across someone who was evicted or was going to be evicted, that they negotiated a unit in the place that was being built so that they could say, I'll take a floor on?
Yeah. Inside or on-site relocation was very much practiced for a long time in Beijing. In the beginning, in the 90s, and at least in many cases, people do have on-site relocation. However, this is a big however, that on-site relocation is like here. The case is not too far to find. Eminent domain, we have urban renewal right here in our neighborhood. They also planners were, liberal planners, all promoting this idea of mix. You mix the original residents with these people who pay higher rents and, and so on. But then designers have their way of making sure these middle class or higher class home buyers, have a more isolated, nice, sort of independent environment. They build walls, easy solution, design, physical solutions. Here you find it right here in San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, and same thing in China too, in Beijing. They have this sort of, it's, nominally or theoretically they are on-site relocation, but the site for relocatees, for Saijianhu, is always invariably much lower quality, no poverty management, and and they are sort of at the bad corners or part of the site. And then the better site is reserved for those who pay premium price for their units. So it's, they are that, and you see a lot of complaints in these projects as well. Yeah. And these days, there are very few on-site relocation. It's all cash. So there's a new policy of cash rather than, compensation in cash rather than in kind. And that also makes it even less possible for people to relocate, not on-site, but just in a similar area, nearby, it becomes almost impossible. Yeah.
So with the cash payout, are there more numbers of evicted people gathering in these groups? Or is it?
In the last 2 years, I think this Olympic game does have some impact on how much they try to minimize, to say the least, these gatherings. I do not see any more. Yeah, But at the same time, however, you do see overall slowing down of demolition. So the pace, of, every year they publish this figure, which is not totally unreliable. It's like annual target of new construction, and based on how many floor area is being demolished, and it's actually much slowed down. And actually, developers are complaining about it because of the slowing down of demolition. The availability of sites that are available for commercial development is actually much reduced as well. So now they have the auction of new land parcels for commercial development provided by Beijing's land, they call it 土地储备中心, Land Reserve Center. They all say, well, we do not have enough sites available for commercial development for people to bet on, because the demolition process is now much more difficult because the disputes, every site that's earmarked for redevelopment, you can be assured there will be protests. Is that they go hand in hand now. So it actually slows down the demolition because of these protests. And this, how much do these protesters get out of these? The compensation rates actually also increased. Yeah. So there is some. We don't know whether we can make a causal linkage between the protests on the one hand and the slowing down of demolition and increased compensation rate on the other. But we do see the coexistence, at least, of these two. And yeah.
This is a quick question for you from Montreal. You say how the Beijing, the planning community, they scaled down a little from their grandeur plans from before when they started due to the protesters. And then I was just wondering, do you know what the status is of the construction? Are they going to be like Athens, in which they poured concrete towards the last week, or are they pretty much almost like complete with their?
I haven't been to Beijing for a year or so, but at some point, the International Olympic Committee had to tell the Beijing Committee to slow down. They were going too fast, and it was going to cost a lot to maintain empty, finished buildings that you have to keep looking new until the end. So they say, you better take your time, be ready just before, but not be ready too early. So they were, I'm sure, they will be ready, there is no doubt. The stop, in 2004, what happened was also very political. There was a shift in the government, and the Hu-Jintao government took, it coincided when they got full control of the military and everything. And there was a sense, there was a lot of instability in the country. So there was a sense to, and a lot of people were petitioning. The numbers were becoming to go out, the cost of all these projects. So there was a major stop on all construction. It was going very fast, and they revised. And it was also at the time when there was this huge hike in the price of steel worldwide. Well, all metals, construction material have gone up because in part of the construction boom in China. So there was a major revision, and for example, the Olympic Stadium was using an incredible amount of steel, was not a very efficient building in that respect, and they had to recalculate. So a lot of the venues had to revise their designs to bring down the cost, to be a bit more environmentally sound, and some projects were scaled down this way. But I'm pretty sure that everything will be in place. I think they're testing all these buildings anyways right now, so I think most buildings are finished. I'd be interested to see the most recent pictures of the landscaping, for example, but I'm very confident.
Yes.
I understand the focus of the forum has been on Seoul and also Beijing particularly, but I know, or I recall anyway, that in the case of the Seoul Olympics, there were geographical locations outside of Seoul as far as Busan, I believe. And in the case of the Beijing Olympics or the Summer Olympics, some of the venues, of course, as far away as Hong Kong. was wondering, did your research, and I guess this is for everyone, encounter anything in terms of the impact of the Olympics on those other geographies?
No, I no notion. Okay, well, thank you very much for participating, and we will see you in next Center for Chinese Studies curriculum. Colloquium. Thank you.